Yo, what is good? High performers and camp believers, welcome to another episode of the Can't Believe I Made It podcast. I am your podcast host and high performance mentor, Desi Abeda. So, happy Mentorship Monday. I'm kind of trying to focus in on what I just experienced this last week. So, for those who have no idea what I'm about to dive into from a life update standpoint, please make sure that you go back to episode 101. I kind of just I during the break, I had some me moments, if you will, some really big growth moments. And one of the big things was taking a chance on myself and joining in on a system, a brand, things that I absolutely believe in, and being able to collaborate and work with high level people, and then bring that into some of the stories and some of the education and habit building that I'm doing for you all today and beyond. And one of the things this last week, so I did my first Red Bull trip up in LA. And there were a lot of things that happened. We got to surf one day, we got to go to the US Surf Open. So there was a lot of things that I was experiencing that I was like, damn, I'm so happy that I did all this work prior. Because at the time, when you're etching away at a goal or etching away at something that's really important for you, I think it's a really normal experience to get impatient, to ask the question, like, when is this going to happen for me? And it's something that I've been having a lot of conversations with a lot of our higher performers in our programs about just that. And one of the things that really came up for me this last week, not only getting to collaborate with other really high level individuals, getting to build ideas, getting to make sure that we're honing it back in on the message and the habits. One thing that came up for me was a lot of gratitude. I shared this with a friend the other day, and it's something that I think is really magical, and it's going to build on what I really wanted to tackle from the standpoint of our Mentorship Monday message today. So, rewind maybe, I want to say like 8 years ago, 6 to 8 years ago, and this is right before my daughter came on the scene. I was I saw this the other day too. Like, when you're in your 20s, you're just like trying to figure out, like, you're trying to figure out what your place is. You're trying to figure out what you want to do, what your life focus is. You're just in a lot of ways, like, you're kind of a waste of space because you're just sat there worrying about what you should be doing. So I saw that quote the other day, and I had a really good laugh, because around that time, about maybe 6, 7, maybe even 8 years ago, I was in LA. I was on the beach, and I was like, you know what? Like, I'm not where I want to be. Like, I just finished school. I just got kicked out of Canada. Like, there's a lot that was going on in my life where I was like, man, I'm completely lost. And I remember sitting on the beach in Santa Monica, that time ago, and I picked up a shell, and I was like, all right, this is going to be my memento. Like, this right here, this moment right here means that, like, I'm going to make sure that I figure this out. I'm going to figure out my life. I'm going to figure out what it is to be passionate about what I'm doing. I don't know what that is, but this memento right here is going to mean that at some point I'm going to make it back to LA, like, living or whatever. Like, I'm going to do that. And I remember I brought it to a brunch. Shout out to Matt and Elmira. I remember I brought this to a lunch, and I was like, they were like, "Hey, how's your trip been?" And I was like, "You know what? Like, it's been really amazing. I got this off the beach, and it's going to be a reminder to myself that I'm going to make it back here. Like, I'm going to do that." And I remember showing it to them, and I don't know if they remember this. So, y'all, if you're listening to this, please shoot me a text and validate this experience. I remember I put it on the table, and they both kind of just looked at me like, "All right, I, I love Des, but he's fucking crazy." And I remember that moment, like, I hadn't thought about that moment at all. And I found myself in my trip this last week, like, because I'm someone who really loves to be outside. I found myself just really walking the beach and just really laughing at that moment and having a lot of gratitude for the process up to this point, because it was kind of like a ripple in time in a lot of ways of, like, hey, you might not need to know, like, what is going to happen, but falling in love with the process is really going to help you to understand that when you're chasing something really important to you, at first it might not be loving you back in the way that you want it to. But if you truly fall in love with that process, it's going to love you back. And that relationship is reciprocal. Right. And so I tell you this story because I came across a piece of content from an Olympic athlete who ended up representing Greece. So I think she's Greek and American. Her name's Alexi Papas. She jumped on the Rich Roll podcast and she mentioned something and a concept that was eerily reminiscent of the 80-20 guideline that I constantly talk to you all about. And one of the things that she came up with from one of her coach, again, when you get to work with high level athletes, you're going to also, those high level athletes are also going to get opportunities to work with high level mentors who have either been in that space, understand the science, understand the psychology. I mean, that's a huge reason why I've brought what I've learned in my process into guiding other high level individuals, because as a mentor myself, I'm also understanding that I don't need to know everything. I don't need to be perfect, but I'm gleaning on my expertise and I'm gleaning on my experiences to help individuals get to a point where they're honoring their own hero's journey. And in Alexi's podcast with Rich Roll, she mentioned this rule of thirds. And without me trying to explain a little bit more, I'm actually just going to play the clip for you and then talk to you about ways of building systems to honor this. Okay. So without further ado, this is Alexi Papas on Rich Roll's podcast.
So my Olympic coach told me after a particularly challenging workout where I could not hit my splits before going to the Rio Olympics, that was okay. It was the rule of thirds. And he was an Olympian, so I was, I always soaked in everything he said. And I was like, what's the rule of thirds? And he said, when you're chasing a dream or doing anything hard, you're meant to feel good a third of the time.
I love this.
Okay, a third of the time, and crappy a third of the time. And if the ratio is roughly in that range, then you're doing fine. So today was the crappy day along your dream chasing.
Right.
And if the ratio is off, like you feel too good all the time or too bad, then you've got to look at if you're fatiguing or not trying hard enough or pushing yourself.
Okay. So there's a lot to unpack when we're talking about the message that she just provided. There's a lot of things that I really love about it because, like I said, it's eerily reminiscent of the 80-20 guideline where 80% of the time you're really throwing yourself and doing hard things. You're really throwing yourself in the process and the objective. And the other 20% is just life being life, is just you being an imperfect human. And if you can stay in that guideline, it's really going to help you to make that 1% progress each and every day, each and every week, and each and every month and beyond. What I really love about this rule of thirds is that obviously it's breaking up your progress or your process into rules of thirds. So on one end of the third, you're feeling really good about what you're doing. And let's also make sure that we have a conversation about like how this guideline, how this rule rather, can be implemented into your life. So you can implement this in your health journey. You can implement this if you're starting up a side gig. And if you're listening to this podcast, you are someone who is trying to hone in on your habits in a way where you can honor your health, you can honor your fulfillment. And we can't not talk about what that means from the standpoint of what you want to provide for the world, whether that is a side gig, whether that is turning your side gig into a main gig, or just merely just honoring your mental health in a way where you can submit a legacy that you're really proud of. Okay. And so if you're listening to this podcast, this rule of thirds is something that I think could be really, really advantageous for you in reference to falling in love with said process. Okay. So let's go ahead and refocus in on what we have here. So in our rule of thirds, we got a third where you're going to feel good about what you're doing. You're going to have a day where everything is clicking. You're feeling really great. You're having great communication. You're making great progress on that side gig, or even just like you're honing in on your habits and you're really proud about that process. The other third is like, it's a blah day. It's an okay day. All right. You're kind of noticing this isn't great, but this isn't bad. Like if anything, this is maintenance. And if you've ever worked with me, you understand that I am likely going to be talking to you about the value of maintenance, because maintenance sometimes is progress. Okay. I was literally just having a conversation with one of our high level and high performing individuals in our program the other day. And so he's kind of at this like 90-day point, and he's talking to me. He's like, dude, I had an off week, man. I only hit my step goal of 7,000. Like, I know like sleep hasn't been great, but I'm really working on making sure that I'm prioritizing a sleep time and a wake time. I'm feeling much more productive with that. And then from a strength training perspective, like, man, I really wanted to hit 3 to 4 days, but I ended up hitting like almost 2. But One of the other things was like, hey, I really want to give into important relationships. I just started seeing someone and it feels really great. I just kind of had an off week. And I kind of laughed and I was like, yo, can I just repeat back to you what you just said to me? Like, your off week, your C plus effort compared to who you were on day one is like A plus 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 effort. Like, can we just acknowledge that in the short 90 days that you've been in this process? And we had a good laugh together, because sometimes when we level up, when we're trying to get that 1% better, you're going to have those maintenance days. And to me, like, that's perfectly okay. Right. And the other third that we're talking about here is those crappy days. Like, you acknowledge, like, you know what? I'm not feeling great. It doesn't feel great to be where I'm at. Like, this sucks. You're just trying to acknowledge that there are ratios and there's a process. And I think what Alexia talked about there, which is even more beneficial, is that there needs to be a balance of the ratios. Because if you're too good, then you might not be challenging yourself enough, right? Because we always want to make sure that we have a gentle balance between being challenged and then being able to navigate wins. Okay. And then the other third, if you're feeling okay, we need to actually ask you, like, hey, are you committed to this goal? Are you committed to this really hard thing? Because there's a difference between absolute commitment and things that you're interested in. I actually just heard this from Alexi too, and I'm actually going to make this another podcast episode, because I think it's really revolutionary in the way that we navigate things that we're doing or things that we want to do. But we do need to ask ourselves, like, if you're feeling okay more often than not, like, are you committed to this really hard thing, or are you just merely interested in it? Because if you're interested in it, then you're likely going to find ways to navigate away from it. You're going to disconnect from that. And the other third, obviously, is crappy. So if you're feeling too crappy, then the goal itself might be too hard. You might not have the systems in order to get to a point where you're balancing that. So in true form, as your high performance mentor or someone who's really trying to help you with the skills, the rituals, and the habits and the embodiment of someone who is a high level individual, I'm going to give you systems today that are going to help you to develop that ratio. So let's go ahead and talk about how we're going to do that together. Okay. So if you are someone who is trying to balance the ratio, or trying to develop a ratio, rather, a third of that ratio for feeling good, and you have something that is really, really hard, or something that you need to learn how to do, the system that needs to be developed there is you need to get yourself a mentor. You need to get yourself someone who knows what's at stake. You need to get yourself someone who understands the tactics, the techniques, and someone who is able to hold space for you. Okay. Someone who can help you to level up in that area. So that's the first thing. And this can be inserted with any hard thing or any important thing that you want to do. So the first one is, in order to feel good, within this rule of thirds, you need to get yourself someone who can teach you how to do what you would like to do, or who you would like to embody. Okay. Now, taking a step down to the other third, or taking a step to the right, I guess, to the other third. There's really no down or up here, because there's a balance of ratio, right? So sending you to the other side of the third is that okay, right? In order to feel that, like, okay, or like you're okay with like what's going on, like you're not like super excited, you're not down on yourself, but you're acknowledging that this is where you are. You need to create your own gratitude process. Right? We've talked a great deal about the 5-minute journal. We've talked a great deal about the science of gratitude. But one of the things that needs to happen here is you need to understand that at any given moment, there are things that you can hold space for, from the standpoint of, hey, this is actually what is going right. This is what I actually feel good about. This is what I can acknowledge is happening. And here's the thing, too, friends, like, we can acknowledge and understand and find love and value for hardship, because it's constantly teaching us something. Okay. And so, in order to develop that rule of feeling okay, you need to make sure that you're getting really solid with your gratitude practice. And what it might look like at the very, very lowest level is, each and every day, you find one or two things that you are truly thankful for, and you spend at least 5 minutes of thinking about and feeling in your body why you're thankful for those items. Now let's talk about crappy, right? Because in a lot of ways, we're probably our biggest asshole to ourselves. But one way that I think you can really start to create a growth mindset around those moments where you're feeling crappy is, you have to confront it. And the system that I would say here is, develop a system where you can measure backwards. You already know that anyone that I work with, we are developing weekly check-ins, excuse me, not only just for them to understand the progress and understand where the pitfalls are, but it's even more so an opportunity for you to get really real with yourself, to confront yourself. Because in a lot of ways, failure is going to teach us far more about the objective in the long run than winning is. Because when you fail, you understand where those pitfalls are, you understand what you need. And if you can start to develop a love, albeit it's a hard love, we all know that there are people or things that we love that sometimes it's really hard to love them. Failure here is no different. So, going back, in order to feel good, we want to make sure that you get yourself a mentor, you develop a system of getting someone who can teach you to do what you need to do in order to feel okay. You create yourself a gratitude practice. It can literally start with one or two items each day that you are happy about, or one or two items that you are grateful for, because that teaches your brain to create different neural pathways where you can understand that at any given moment, there are things that you can sit with and observe. Okay. And that third thing, in order to feel crappy, is we have to confront it. What do we feel crappy about? Alexi talked a little bit about it. Are you too fatigued? In her case, she's talking about from an athlete perspective. So if she's too fatigued, the natural response is going to be you have to rest, you have to recover. It's no different here. So the way that we recover is we build awareness about what we're doing. All right. I hope this was helpful for you. Happy mother freaking Monday. I love you all. I had a phenomenal week. I'm going to build on this. I'm on cloud nine right now, and I hope that you are too. And if you're not, let's develop systems where we can navigate that rule of thirds in our own lives. Peace.